Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends. Guys, welcome back to another episode of r/ProRevenge, where you come to hear stories about people getting what they deserve after wronging someone. Guys, the stories today are super satisfying, and I promise. So sit back, put your feet up, unless you're driving, then don't do that. And get ready for some awesome stories, guys, and be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. So, my sister-in-law came out as a trans woman when she was 18 years old, and my wonderful in-laws kicked her out of the house right then and there. They told her to leave the house and threw her out at 8 p.m. with no money or even any documents. Her father took her car keys from her too, and she had to walk 8 miles to get to our place. She was crying when we took her in. Now, this is horrible behavior, but my husband and I would have just cut them off if that's all they did. But they doubled down. They refused to hand over any of the documents, and my brother-in-law had to go over and barge into their house to get them. They also cleaned up all the money in a joint account, and she had saved up $8,000 working part-time all throughout high school. They took that money and also sold her car, which was in their name. They were trying to ruin her life as much as they could. So my father-in-law is a small-time businessman, and his biggest account was supplying my employer. I had helped him get the contract, and it was a very lucrative contract for him. My employer was a family business, and they treated long-term employees more like family than as employees. So I was talking to my boss about what happened. He told me if I could find someone within a 5% range of the price my father-in-law offered, they would make the switch. My father-in-law offered us really great rates. He was very good at his job, but he had messed up the contract because even though we always bought from him, we weren't obligated to buy from him. We could switch suppliers anytime, but he got complacent and assumed that we wouldn't switch suppliers. Now, it did take me 6 months of painful searching to find a supplier who could replace him and get us a great rate. This was not a major part of my duties, and I had to put in way more hours than normal to find a damn supplier. But when I did find them, I waited about a month before informing my boss. You see, my in-laws had been planning to do a major renovation for a long time, and it involved tearing down a major portion of their house. So I waited until the renovation work had truly started before informing my boss. And with that, we started to get supplies from the new supplier the next month, and it crushed his business. It destroyed his unit economics, and he had to scramble to find new customers. They ended up having to sell their house to save the business, and they didn't get a good rate for it because the house was half torn down when they sold it. My in-laws did try to get money from my brother-in-law, but he told them no. My father-in-law is a decent businessman, and he did crawl his way out of the hole they dug for themselves, but even after 8 years, they still haven't bought a new house. Now, I heard they're still sour about what happened. I mean, I was just doing my job, and if they had just kicked her out, they would have still had the house. Wow guys, so those parents definitely deserved what they got, and some would argue that it's not even enough. Like, kicking your own kid out of your life is one thing, but they actually went out of their way to make their child's life even more difficult than it might have already been. Props to OP though, not all heroes wear capes, guys. So for all of you who are wondering, OP does come into the comments section. We were worried about her for a little while, but she's a tough woman and she got back up and is thriving right now. She got a computer science degree from an amazing college and is working for a cool startup and has a loving girlfriend. So there you go, guys, for those who are curious. This is a story of how patience is key, and how letting someone else get revenge for you is by far easier than doing it yourself. I live in one of those doubled-up houses, where they built 2 houses adjacent to each other with the same layout, so we share a wall but are otherwise completely separate. Now, for years, the house next to me belonged to a nice old lady who you never really noticed or had any trouble with. When she died and the house was resold, that's where the troubles began. The target is someone I'll refer to as Jack Sparrow, for the reasons that will become clear later. Now, Jack owns a sizable construction business and does some real estate on the side. He buys a house and rents it to a bunch of foreign construction workers that work for his business. Now, I do say foreign because it is relevant to the story. Anyways, he stuffs about 4 or 6 of these guys in the house for them to live while they work here. Now, I don't have anything against foreign construction workers, but these guys living next door have 2 traits that are very problematic. They are extremely loud and they do not give a care in the world about anyone else. We're talking non-stop music and partying starting from Thursday evening throughout the entire weekend until they leave at 5 a.m. Monday morning to go back to work. Seriously, I don't know how or when they even sleep. It's literally non-stop. I'd be wearing my headphones and can still hear their loud music. Now at first, I do the neighborly thing and just suck it up, thinking it's a one-time party, one weekend. But after the third time in a row, I go over to ask them to turn it down since, night disturbance. It's technically illegal to blast music this loud after a certain hour. So I'm met with a half-hearted, "So sorry, we fix." Except nothing changes. I go over several more times and each time angrier, and each time met with either "we don't think it's loud, but we fix," or "not loud at all, go away." Now, if I can hear your music in my own house, over my own TV and music, I would say that it's in fact too loud. So I contact Jack, since he's their landlord, and explain the situation, after which I met with an abrupt, "Sorry, not my damn problem." Basically, Jack told me to get bent. So I involve police and call them every time things get out of hand. After about a dozen calls, sometimes even twice in the same night, it's clear that even the regular police interference doesn't help with the situation. Now's probably a good time to mention that I am a lawyer, so I know what the next legal steps are. I also know that other than a token paper from a judge saying their music is too loud, I'm not really gonna get anything. Things would become a cat and mouse game where they would blast their music extremely loud to piss me off or to wake me up for a brief moment, so that by the time I could get proof or police to show up, there would be no music. I'm deadlocked, with my only further option being pretty useless and a waste of time. At this point, I'm biding my time and just waiting till something changes. I'm not saying I condone people who bludgeon their neighbor to death with a rusty pipe, but I do somewhat understand what would drive someone to that point. One day I'm at home and I notice quite a lot of ruckus next door, more than usual. Suddenly, I see through my garden window that a wall is being partially torn down. You see, sometime over the years, the neighbors had built a small adjacent side building adjoining the main house. It was right on the border between us, and when the gardens were being refenced, the wall was used as a divider to save on fencing. The said wall was now in the process of having its top part ripped off by a crane. Now, I wasn't informed of any of this, which, while not technically needed, it would have been a nice thing to do. So I go take a walk and take a look at what we're doing, and see that they've torn down the entire side building. The remaining wall between our gardens is the only part that's been kept intact, and even then, not the top part. So being a lawyer, and specifically a construction/permit lawyer, I know two things. One, that doing stuff like this is not allowed without a pre-approved permit from the city. And two, there's no way in hell that they have said permit, as I would have seen the application for it, as I'm able to see what permits are being applied for my job. And when I do, I tend to look over to my own area just so I can keep up with what's being planned in my area. So that's it, the moment I've been waiting for. The situation has changed and the time has come to exact revenge. A quick email sent to the municipal authorities lets me do my civic duty of reporting a potential crime, the fact that someone is building or demolishing without a permit. Since this is a simple report, no response happens since I'm not an official victim or anything yet. Since no further construction happens for a few days and everything was removed, I assumed that was that, and they would only tear down the side structure since it was starting to fall apart due to age. But the next week, more construction materials are being delivered and construction starts. I send a new email to the city services with new pictures saying that apparently there is more planned and that I hope they undertake the appropriate action. Instant response less than an hour later. They'd called Jack after the first time to inform him that what he was doing required a permit, and he had assured them that he didn't know that and that he would stop construction and request a permit. They called him again after my email, reprimanded him for not following his earlier promise, and he said again that he would shut it down. I happened to be working from home that day and had to stop myself from waving to the construction crew as they left. So later that day, I get an angry phone call from Jack, who accuses me of reporting him and that I would be sorry, and that he would come after me for damages for his delays. I respectfully inform him that even if I reported him, I wouldn't have done anything wrong because from the looks of it, he didn't have a permit and should have known that before starting work illegally without one. I end the call before I start to sound too happy with things. Now Jack has at this point no idea what I've initiated with this. He is Jack Sparrow, and he's just rung the bell that awakens the Kraken that'll destroy him. He just doesn't know it yet. So, you see, there's a good reason why most people consult an expert and or a lawyer when they want to apply for a permit. The rules involved are so convoluted and needlessly complex that navigating them as a non-professional is extremely hard and time-consuming. And a single mistake can torpedo your entire case, forcing you to do it all over. I have put an end to entire projects by pointing out that on page 127, section 35-1A, something was left blank and should have been answered. So I did some digging and found out that the previous owners of the house had actually consulted each other about the side building and agreed on making the wall a part of the divider between their gardens, so much so that they shared the costs of it and the ownership. So the wall that he destroyed a part of, that was also my wall, which of course means that I'm entitled to damages, but that's not the important part. The important part is that he needs my permission to do anything to that wall. So when he applied for a permit a few weeks later, I went to the city center and looked at the application. I noticed that they were planning to do some stuff to said wall which I own 50% of. So I filed a complaint. I followed proper procedure about the permits that even if granted would never be executed, since Jack needed permission from me in regards to the wall, and he did not have it, nor was I intending to grant it. This should kill his permit, since permits cannot be granted if you know in advance that they cannot be realized. No sense in granting a permit to build a certain kind of house when you know they're never actually gonna build it. Now, Jack was a bit of a smooth talker, and as a construction entrepreneur, he had his connections, and permits are a political decision here as much as a legal one. So despite a 100% correct legal objection that should have killed his permit, it went through, and he actually called me about it to gloat a little. But not to worry, one can appeal a permit in my country. The only requirement is that you pay a €100 fee, which I gladly paid. The appeal instance is a subnational instance and does not care one bit about Jack's political ties or the half-hearted crap that the city officials wrote to justify granting the permit in spite of the concerns I raised. They terminate his permit without any hesitation on the aforementioned legal grounds. Jack sees his permit blocked until he fixes the issue, which he can't, because I'm not really inclined to agree with his plans for our wall. So at this point, going through 2 lengthy procedures, it's been over 7 months. The neighbors have an unfinished construction project in their yard the entire time, forced to store their stuff elsewhere. Something that was supposed to be a temporary thing for weeks while we build, turned into something that was taking months, with no end in sight. The above was the administrative part of the matter, and him getting the permit. Now, doing the construction work without a permit is also a criminal offense. And of course, my report got passed around to the appropriate instances, so now Jack was also the subject of a criminal procedure for construction offense. Not only did he risk fines and jail time, he was a construction business and used his own construction business for the work he did on the property. So his company was also on the hook, and one of the sentences that can be given in these types of crimes is to be prohibited to do construction or construction-related activity as a business, either permanently or temporarily. Not only was he personally on the line, his entire business was as well. During the debacle, Jack tried to sell the property, and this didn't go too well because of a few reasons. 1. The property was inflicted with an illegal situation. The side building was torn down illegally, and until the illegal status was resolved, it would stick with the property. This means the house value would be substantially lower since nobody wants to buy something they'll have to spend time and money on it to make legal again. It would cost the money to either rebuild the torn down building or getting a permit for it. Secondly, Jack never intended to sell the property in its current state. So what he does, as I now know, is buy cheap old houses like the one next to me. He puts some of his crew in it who can't complain about the subpar accommodation. They thrash the place because they don't care and he lets them. And when the place is done, he tears it down and sells it to a developer, or he develops it himself. However, due to his construction crime and the accompanying status for the property, Step 2 was not even an option. He couldn't renovate it the way he needed it to be because covering the crime was always a requirement in any permit he would request for the building. And because of me, he couldn't cover it. He couldn't sell it either because the place was trashed, and any developer looking at it would dip out when they realized that there was a construction issue and a vocal neighbor who would oppose anything big they would try to do there. There's lots of easier properties to develop than that one. So in conclusion, Jack is staring down the barrel of a criminal court procedure that's about to happen, where he's risking his business and his livelihood. His existing projects also gather special attention from the city services now, since he's now outed to them as someone who cuts corners on permits and regulations. He also can't sell the property unless he cuts a massive loss, since in its current state, it's absolutely trashed. He can't develop it or sell to a developer because all the development plans involve the adjoining wall, which he can't use in big ways unless he gets my permission. The rowdy neighbors are stuck living in a smaller house than what they had in a place they trashed, but can't be fixed in the major way that it needs. They have quieted down quite a lot, possibly because Jack blames them for his current situation, which isn't wrong, I suppose. I have awakened the Kraken and set it off on Jack Sparrow, and it utterly ruined him. And the best part is, I actually had very little to do with it. All I did was nudge the abomination that's the municipal bureaucracy and point it in his direction, and they did the rest. Now, I could tell you that he called me to complain, and even beg about letting him use the wall the way he needs to so he can get on with his business and fix the issues. I want to tell you that he told me that he was losing money and customers over this, and he was in danger of losing his entire business and his livelihood. And that I then smugly replied with, "Not my problem." But he didn't, so for now, we'll have to imagine that he did. My friends, that was a great revenge, and there's only one thing left for OP to do: lowball the crap out of Mr. Jack Sparrow, buy his house for dirt cheap, and profit. But seriously guys, construction permits are nothing to mess around with. And you'd think Jack would have known this owning his own construction company, right? Which really makes me wonder about all the other shady stuff he might have pulled. So I did this to an ex, who asked me to move out while she was on a work trip and told me that she was coming back with her new boyfriend. We were still together when she left. So I got these little noisemakers, battery-powered ones the size of a quarter that emit sounds at just the right volume that you aren't sure if you really heard it. So quiet that two people could be sitting in an average-sized room, and while one can barely hear it, the other one wouldn't hear a thing. They last ages and fit perfectly in light fixtures and in wall outlets. I got a box of 20 of them for like $100 on eBay and got so creative all over the house. I also got her car and even hid them in a boat that her father got her. Now, these little bastards make a lot of noise at complete random intervals. It could be a minute, could be hours, could take a whole day off. They cycle noises like children laughing, a dying breath, a whistle, scratching noises, some other ones I can't remember, but you get the idea. It was so unpredictable that it was near impossible for someone to just figure it out. So months go by and I get myself a new place and get my life back up. Now, we had a few friends in common and one of them I kept up with. They were kind of sour about how she ended things, but they had grown up together and kept the friendship, loosely talking and catching up on occasion. So I never really asked about her, but one day we get to talking and he's wanting to prank some friends on a camping trip. So I tell him about the noisemakers. Now, as I'm telling him about them, he slowly starts to make a face, like he's gradually losing his mind. So he gets this huge grin on his face, and then he asked me, "So, you put these in Britney stuff, didn't you?" And when I admit, he starts laughing hysterically. So it turns out her new boyfriend only lasted a few months, and he left telling her that he couldn't handle whatever it was that was going on with them and their mental states. It turns out that for a while, they had both heard things, and sometimes only one person would hear them, which gave the illusion that the other person was crazy. Sometimes they even argued about the noises that were heard, and you can probably see how annoying it would get, not having the other person believe what you're hearing. They couldn't figure it out, and eventually he won it out completely, thinking they were both going crazy. It was amazing. I hadn't expected to hear anything about it. I rode that train for weeks. When it went away, I got another hit of that high. She moved out, told her parents she didn't want the house and to give it to her brother or to sell it. Wouldn't tell them why. I always tell people who ask about her that I hold no grudge and don't tell them the part where I totally messed with her so bad that I overshot the got her backstage and hit that blissful stage of satisfied with my work. My wife knows this story by heart because it's her favorite one to tell. Wow guys, I'd love to know what the heck those noisemakers are, because I have a lot of people at my work who I'd love to prank, and this sounds like such an amazing thing to have. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /ProRevenge. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the stories today, and if you did, do hit that thumbs up button. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, a crazy Karen pretends to be an ex-cop to arrest OP. It doesn't go well, so check it out if you haven't, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Steve-O loves you.